it was our generation pushing a door open so that generations behind us didn't have to knock.
Yeah.
And if we were able to do that just by going out and having fun and proving to so many critics that sports were just as good for girls as they were for boys, then yes, I'm going to accept those accolades on behalf of my teammates who were so important to developing women's sports.
Sports taught you how to compete, how to lead, how to push past limits when no one was watching. But what happens when the season ends, when the uniform comes off and the identity shifts? Welcome to the Beyond Her Game podcast. I'm Tori Barker, former Division I softball player and founder of Beyond Her Game. Athletes are trained to pursue excellence and lead under pressure, but no one prepares us for life when the game changes. This podcast is for female athletes building what comes next. We talk about business, brand, money, mindset, and identity beyond sports. The things no one teaches you in the locker room. Because the skills you built through sports don't disappear. They're just the beginning. Welcome to Beyond Her Game. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us on the podcast. Today, I am honored and excited to introduce you to my guest, Karen Rudolph. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day here in Northern California.
I know it's so fun when we get to talk to people who are nearly in our backyard because it's so fun. We talk to people virtually all over the world, and now here we are, literally neighbors. We've got to get together in person, and I'm so excited that we had the opportunity to meet.
Oh, absolutely. I'm thrilled to be able to talk with you and your viewers today about my book, Sideline No Longer. So,
Yes. Well, let's kick it off. I want you to first start with telling a little bit of your story because you were part of one of the first generations of women impacted by Title IX. So, tell us a little bit about that, but did you realize at that time that you were living through history or making history at that moment?
oh, absolutely not. For myself and those women in my generation that were able to experience intercollegiate athletics, we just wanted a opportunity to play. And for me, I grew up in a small town in Northwest Missouri. My twin sister and I were recruited as eighth graders to play on a women's amateur softball association fast pitch traveling softball team. And I can honestly say none of my classmates in my high school ever did anything close to what I was able to do. And that's sad, really, because I would have wanted to experience all those things with people that I grew up with in my hometown. But I had played on this team. By the time I finished high school, we were playing mostly against women that were in college or even
Wow.
beyond that had played softball, competitive softball for more years than I had been born. And it gave me a confidence that came from not just the physical strength that you get, the mental strength from being a competitive athlete,
Mm.
but from just performing under pressure. And so by the time I went to the University of Missouri, enrolled there as a freshman, I took this confidence and this desire to play sports right there with me.
Oh, I love it because, I often talk about, and as people hear on the podcast, of there's so many lessons that you learn from athletics that can carry over into your life, your adulthood, your career, your parenting. And it's like so fascinating to hear the stories like generation to generation that you're able to tell because you lived in this time where it wasn't something that was second nature. Like a girl couldn't just go sign up for a team. They couldn't find a sport to play. That was being built at the time that you were growing up, and the opportunity that you had with this traveling softball team is amazing, like you said, and so unique that I love hearing these stories. And, as you went into college, that just continued to develop these stories and this direction that you were headed towards advocating for women in sports is just amazing, which leads us to your book. So talk to us about your book and how that came about and the stories that you tell in the book.
Well, in the 1970s, there was a lot of change. I mean, we come through the 1960s and all the movements toward racial equality in the 1970s. The emphasis to me really became on women and opportunities for women. As a student at the University of Missouri during the very middle years of the 1970s, um, I really advocated for the opportunities for women's sports. As a kid, for some reason, I just always had a passion to play. Maybe it came from my parents who would play catch with us in the side yard or insisted that we play on the local swim team or do any of a number of things. I always felt like if sports were good for boys, and they are, then sports would also be good for girls.
Yeah.
And so while I was at the University of Missouri, there were a lot of changes that happened. The year before I started in 1972, there was a law that was passed in Congress that came to be known simply as Title IX. And it really was a catalyst for educational opportunities for women in graduate schools, in business, in law, in medicine. And it quickly was applied to women's athletics.
Mhm.
And so when I was enrolling in the University of Missouri in the fall of 1973, uh, the chancellor of the university gave the first budget for women's sports. It was $15,000
Oh,
to
wow.
support 8 different women's sports. And college coaches were really paid very little.
Mhm.
Sometimes some teams had to buy their own uniforms, but the next year, the budget was $45,000. And so things were increasing rapidly. At the same time, women's sports and athletics were governed by an all women's organization that had started competition, and it came out of women's physical education. And so it had very education focused goals. It grew to have almost 1,000 member schools, and yet they had this emphasis on volunteering so that at a tournament, a national tournament or events, it was really funded, or financed through volunteers.
Mm.
And so there wasn't a lot of money in women's sports in those years. And so, when I saw all the changes by the time I was a junior, women's athletic scholarships had become legalized nationally. I received one of the first women's athletic scholarships at the University of Missouri. And I also participated on a Title IX self-evaluation committee as the only student member that brought
Wow.
the student viewpoints
Yeah.
to researching whether or not Title IX was being enacted on
Mm.
the University of Missouri campus. So I had this strong base of what I personally experienced. And yet it wasn't until years later, 50 years later, when the University of Missouri hosted a celebration of Title IX and women's sports that I began to learn about the turbulent years after I had graduated and how confusing it was to comply with Title IX at these large universities and yet follow the rules of the women's organization. There were a number of women, including the athletic director, first women's athletic director at the University of Missouri, that I had gotten to know, Jean Sarah. And she became one of 11 women that learned of that dealt with a very perplexing problem. And the problem was, how do we help women's athletics grow when we are hampered by the rules and regulations of the very organization meant to support women's athletics. You see, Title IX compliance was dictated at each institution by comparison to what the men did. And
Interesting.
on small college campuses back east or nationally, the men's programs were dealt with in a very equitable way. The men get this and the women get that. But at the large Division I football oriented university, there were much larger gaps to
Mm.
comply with. And
Yeah.
honestly, the men weren't going to cut back on their scholarships. They weren't going to cut back on their recruiting. They weren't going to cut back on the added benefits. So these women athletic directors, led by Jean Sarah and 10 of her allies at schools like UCLA or Stanford or USC, Penn State, Nebraska, Ohio
Yeah.
State, they realized that in order for them to comply with the dictates of Title IX, their programs were going to have to become more similar to what the men's programs were like. And they really had to resolve that issue and did so by 1981. There was an opportunity where the NCAA wanted to vote in governance of women's championships. And
Mm.
it was highly controversial
Oh yeah.
because the women who organized the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women were passionate about their organization. They felt like they had the perfect solution for intercollegiate athletics with downplaying intercollegiate athletics. And they stood strongly against the NCAA because the NCAA really had fought against
Yeah.
Title IX. They had
Yeah.
taken the AIW to court. And so these two organizations with differing philosophies really battled each other for control of women's sports. And that's really what the book came out of. Who is going to govern women's intercollegiate sports? How do we resolve these differences between rule systems in men's and women's sports?
Yeah.
The university presidents were tired of um, just the conflict
Yeah.
between two organizations. One, the women's organization, which really set up, and I referred to civil rights battles earlier in the 1960s. The women's organization really wanted a separate but equal system. And the men's organization really strove to be the most competitive, commercialized. Let's reach out to alumni. Let's have
Yeah.
more fans in the stands, whether it was the basketball arena or the football stadium. So, this conflict had to be resolved. And today we look at sports and athletics, and most people don't know about that early conflict.
Yeah, I can imagine as you're talking the adoption rate of bigger universities versus smaller universities, like you said, had to be so different, right? Like there's probably smaller universities who didn't have those huge football and basketball
Exactly.
teams, and then now it's like you said, this big gap that they're trying to bridge between with the women's athletics coming into the arena, and then even like you said, filling the stands, getting, people to want to watch these sports. Like that's like the next level of,
Yeah.
challenge that the
Yeah.
university had to battle against. Right now, they're bringing in a new sport, the equality for the women to play, but then also, there's a revenue side of things. I'm sure at that
Mhm.
time, as there is now,
Yeah.
to, sell tickets, to promote the university and all of those things that, bigger universities had a huger gap to fill as this was
Yes.
evolving over time.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And, for the conflict, um, the desire had to be communicated
Mm,
to the one organization by these 11 women that I write about in the book. The desire to join with an organization that had hindered them for
mm,
years, forced them to go to court to defend the aims of Title IX, and that these women wanted to begin to align similar interested to separate but equal
Yeah.
was not going to work in women's sports, much like it didn't work in racial civil rights either. So
Yeah.
these women had to really risk their reputations, their jobs, and their futures to ensure that women athletes had the same opportunities that
Yeah.
men had. And it's just fascinating to me to see how these women went about it. And yet, in the years following the change from governance from an all women's organization to the NCAA, nobody really has ever told that story, mostly because these women didn't want to attract further criticism. After all, the women in that all women's organization referred to them as the turncoats
Mm,
and the
interesting.
traitors to women's sports and athletics. They had sought more.
Mm,
Those women, those 11 women that banded together, had sought more for
yeah.
women's sports and athletics. And yet, within that women's organization, they were reviled, honestly. So these women really downplayed their role in this. They didn't want to risk further intimidation. And
Yeah.
it really hasn't been until the last few years that they've been willing to share their roles in this and actually want it to
Yeah.
be told. So, for me to be able to come full circle and tell their story and honor them for their roles in in providing the foundation for women's sports and athletics, I'm going to step way out on the end of a branch and say it never would have occurred under the system set up by the women's organization. Now, I can applaud them
Yeah.
because I was an AIW athlete and the organization afforded me opportunities to be able to compete on the intercollegiate athletics. And I do applaud them for starting women's college sports.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if the goal line was going from one goal line to the goal line at the opposite end to get there, the women's organization could only take them so far. And it
Yeah.
needed the impetus of these 11 women who were willing to risk their reputations to do what they felt and what they hoped was the right thing for all women athletes to receive the same benefits that the men on their campus were receiving. To me, I just want to applaud them and
Yeah.
for finally revealing the story.
What do you think inspired them or changed their mind to finally share the story?
On each of their campuses, as I talked to them, they were in combined departments where they were working alongside men. This was before the NCAA took over, so the late 1970s. So they were learning skills, and their college presidents were also very much on board with having one organization because it was very, very confusing. Like the registrar at the University of Missouri, uh, I met with him recently when I was back on campus. And during that time, there were different sets of rules. The men had some, the women had some were totally dissimilar.
Yeah.
And so, with this kind of support, I think that the 11 women felt strongly about moving women's athletics forward. And yet they were willing to just sweep their role in moving women's athletics forward in supporting governance by the NCAA until the last few years. And why is that?
Yeah.
I think wisdom comes with age. And I think that finally they wanted the recognition that they had um, moved women's sports to where they are today. And in the last 5 years, you see the growth rate for women's sports really accelerate.
Yes.
And you see so many organizations. I learned the other day that there are over 50 or 80 podcasts devoted simply to women's sports. I was amazed. I'd like to listen to each one of those and
Right.
their take. And the organizations, the media
Mm,
organizations, the television networks, the women's sports bars that have cropped up, the professional opportunities have really taken off. And so, as a part of that, I think that these five women that are still living today that shared with me their stories, and why and how they were able to move women's sports over that last hurdle.
mm,
I think these women finally recognized that they had had a vital role in that and wanted to share with me that background and that perspective. So, uh,
yeah.
I don't think this book could have been written and until recently. I think that for me to be able to share all of their stories from my own personal viewpoint and
Yeah.
understand the questions to ask has been invaluable. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's only been in the last 5 years. And this book has been a 3 year process, really. So, yeah, we are just riding the coattails of all these awesome things that are
Yeah.
happening. But to also answer the question of how did we get here? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and what an honor for you to be able to tell those stories and, be a part of documenting that history. Because I think, like we've mentioned, current generations and young generations now wouldn't understand or haven't been taught the legacy and the history of women's sports. And so having people like you in this book and women of that time telling their stories and sharing the experiences is only going to, I think, empower these young female athletes now to feel honored themselves to be able to play a sport in this collegiate role, and all of the everything that comes from being a female in sports is just like the doors are wide open, and I can't wait for the future to continue growing in that opportunity that comes for these female athletes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can remember as a child um, devouring the issues of Sports Illustrated that came out that maybe had Billie Jean King on the cover,
Yeah.
or Donna Di Verona, who was a swimmer, or any of these women that were competing nationally or internationally. Uh, if they had a full page photo, I would put that on my bulletin board, or sometimes I would put them on the ceiling. So as I laid there in bed, I could dream of the day when women's sports were accepted, when my classmates could have had an opportunity to play. So
Yeah.
many tell me now, I wish I had gotten an opportunity to
Yeah.
play. And I yearn for all girls to have that opportunity. As I sometimes say in the talks or speeches that I give, it was our generation pushing a door open so that generations behind us didn't have to knock.
Yeah.
And if we were able to do that just by going out and having fun and proving to so many critics that sports were just as good for girls as they were for boys, then yes, I'm going to accept those accolades on behalf of my teammates who were so important to developing women's sports on the teams that I played on, and to women across the nation who were willing to just stand up and say, we want the opportunity to play. And if sports are as good for, and sports are just as good for girls as they are for boys.
Yeah.
So, yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right.
What would you say one of the biggest lessons you've learned personally from being an athlete that you've carried into your adulthood?
I think that's a great question, because to narrow it down to just a thought or one thing, I think it's the importance of sports and competition honing a young person's character,
Mm,
whether it's golf and learning math skills and keeping a scorecard for their competitor. I love junior golf. My grandson plays up in Truckee, California. And you have to agree at the end of each hole how many strokes your opponent took. it's addressing the ball. It's not
Mm.
cheating. It's learning how to make decisions. And so all of that play into the importance of sports and the character development, the willingness to compete for something, to throw yourself into it and risk losing.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody saying something like, "You're a loser."
Mm.
No, what did you learn from that opportunity? So I think it's just the character development along with the physical confidence. It comes from practicing and learning a sport, the skills development, all of that plays through into adulthood to allow uh, you to persevere in business or
Yeah.
education when the going gets hard. Maybe those lessons that you learned on a hot summer day on a ball field of continuing to strive with your team to become the very best that you can be.
Yeah.
I think all of that plays into the importance of sports and just my own um, palette of what I learned from being a competitor because boy, oh boy, I was.
And you're so right. I mean, there's something about being an athlete. That part of you never goes away, right? That's something that athletics is always a part of you. And, myself, I see it in, the way that I approach entrepreneurship, the way that I parent, the way that I coach, the way that I look at things. The perspective is so different from people. You can see the comparison of people who have been athletes and people who haven't, and there's just like some little difference in there. And it's, I'm passionate about supporting women in sports, and I have two young boys, so obviously, raising good male athletes and human beings, and just teaching them those lessons that they can learn through athletics are so important to me. And so, I just love being able to be a part of this journey.
Oh, absolutely. And um, you're right. The lessons that you learn are there for a lifetime. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right on that.
So let's wrap up with one final question. So, what do you hope that your book and the work contributes to the future of women in sports?
Well, I hope to honor the future by recognizing the past. And as a child, I was always interested in history. My parents developed that love for us, for learning and respecting what went on
Mm.
before ourselves, that we were a small part of a bigger picture. And I think just honoring the past by recognizing the shoulders that we stand in. Now, women's sports obviously didn't just start in the 1970s. The catalyst, certainly for intercollegiate sports, was the enactment of Title IX. But I can remember as a child um, watching the few women's sports events that might have been televised and going to events like the Women's AAU National Basketball Tournament that was held 10 miles from my hometown in St. Joseph, Missouri. And my dad taking us, and as a first grader, thinking, oh, if only I could get the chance to play someday.
Yeah.
And so it's respecting those women that were toiled in obscurity, who overcame things 100 years ago, fighting against philosophies that were against women participating. Like one of the things I learned in this research was that there was a group that opposed women even being in the 1932 Los Angeles Olympics. And the women that competed in that did so without having very much support. I mean, they
Mm.
were the true trailblazers, and because women originally didn't really compete in the
Yeah.
Olympics, and that just blew my mind. That even in Los Angeles, they wouldn't be supported or encouraged to
Mm.
participate. So the one thing that I'm hoping that we get out of the book is just the explanation of the issues that had to be resolved and why women's athletics had to transition from an all women's organization and its philosophy into a men's organization that had claimed that it was about men, of men, by men, and for men, why that was important to reach the pinnacle of where we are today. And so just learning about that, these women, what they went through, their stories, their hardships, the challenges that they faced is just so important to really understand and appreciate where we are today. So yes, that's my goal for the book. It has been a pleasure to do that research. It's been an adventure for me, and it continues to be an adventure.
Well, Karen, it's been such a pleasure and an honor to have you as a guest, sharing your story, sharing the stories of others, and highlighting this book that you have. And I just appreciate you being a guest here. And I'd love for you to share where people can connect with you or find the book.
Well, on social media, it would be Sideline No Longer, all lowercase, underscore, untold stories. So on Facebook or Instagram, you can find it there. You can also find it on LinkedIn if that's an aspect or a social media site that you utilize. And my book is on Amazon, and you could find it at Sideline No Longer. So that's really the story. Women's athletics truly today are sideline no longer, opportunities abound. This generation is going to go far beyond everything that we ever dreamed about. It's the exclamation point
I
of
love that.
everything we ever thought. And to watch the training, the coaching, the investment that parents make in their daughters as well as their sons, the next best chapter is still waiting to be written. But this chronicles, Sideline No Longer chronicles the story of how we got to where we are today. So, Tori, thank you for the opportunity to share about the book and share a little bit about my life and share about the stories of these women who really were the trailblazers who brought us to where we are today.
Oh, it's amazing. And I will definitely make sure in the show notes we have links to all of your social channels and to the Amazon link so they can find the book. Again, Karen, thank you so much for being a guest. It's been a pleasure having you. And if you're a female athlete, get the book and learn about the history that came before you.
Yes, and it's a history. It's not dry, it's stories. And if you love stories, you're going to love the book. So, Tori, thanks for the opportunity to chat with you today. It's been my pleasure. I appreciate everything that you're doing in women's sports.